Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Let's pay attention to me. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm so excited to have you all here with me this morning for leveraging your CRM to fuel transfer success. My name is Austin McGrath. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the Associate Director of Transfer Admissions at Columbia College Chicago. So I wanted to start this morning with a little bit about me, just so you can understand where this presentation is coming from. So I currently oversee all transfer and second bachelor admission processes at Columbia. But before that, I started as a transfer admissions officer, and then I spent about a year and a half in enrollment operations. So really working on the back end of Slate to build queries, clean up data, work with source imports, and I ended up finding a love for that. So now I'm able to blend my two areas of passion, which is transfer students and transfer student success, and how we can actually utilize Slate. I love conferences because there's big ideas and lots of amazing conversations. But anyone familiar with Clifton Strengths? My number one is achiever, which means I like to get things done. So big ideas are great, but let's actually build the processes. Let's actually do the things to make it work. So that's where this presentation is really coming from. And also, I'm a Gemini because I know you were all wondering. So let's jump right in. A disclaimer, this presentation will be really fast. We only have 30 minutes together, and I wanted to pack as much into this as I possibly could. In my practice runs, sometimes there's 3 minutes, sometimes there's no minutes for questions. So we will see. But that being said, my contact information will be on the last slide, and I will be here until Saturday. So please talk to me afterwards, flag me down, let's have coffee. If you not only have questions about my processes, but if there's something you're working on that you just want to ideate and give ideas back and forth. So please work with me on that. This is going to focus on the CRM Slate by Technolutions. That's what Columbia has used since 2017. So that is what we are using. My hope, though, is that for anyone in the room not using Slate, as Janet shared in the opening remarks yesterday, to sort of come in with no expectations and think about how you can adopt this into your system. And then lastly, this is going to highlight projects at a surface level. Again, we've got 30 minutes together, so if it feels like I'm barely scratching the surface, I am. So when I was first approved to give this presentation, there were so many ideas that came to my mind of things that I could share and talk about that we do at Columbia. But ultimately, what I decided to focus on this morning were reader-based projects and initiatives. So we're going to be talking about some of our transfer-specific tags that we utilize, how a little bit of our official credit evaluation process is utilized, and then we have a National Student Clearinghouse process as well. So first, to make sure we're all on the same page, what is Reader? Reader is essentially something in Slate that allows us to organize students and applications and materials into specific workflows and into specific bins. So for most of us in the room, it's probably what we use for our application decisions. So actually considering students for admission to the college. But we also have workflows for specialty scholarship consideration, portfolio review. So really, this is meant to be a multifaceted tool beyond just admissions decision making. So show of hands, not just who's heard of the Student Clearinghouse, but who's actually familiar with what it is and what they do. Not surprised, we're all transfer professionals. But just for anyone who's a little bit unsure, it essentially is a national database that houses a student's entire enrollment record, at least from the schools that report that information up to them. And so prior to the process that we'll walk through in a minute, the way that we had been utilizing the NSC was essentially that a student would complete their application and submit all of their transcripts, and then they would move into first read. At that point, a transfer admissions officer who's reviewing that student for their decision would run an NSC check off to the side and then add any results that they found. That was problematic for a couple of reasons. Number one being that student is making it, if they're making it to first read, it means that they're making it to the awaiting decision status. right? And so when we think about the funnel, that's telling us a very specific number of students are actually ready to be considered for admission, when in reality, I just found 15 schools. So you're not ready to be considered for admission. So the new process helped us combat that. And then secondly, for those maybe a little less familiar, there is a verification process through the federal government for FAFSA, or as Midwesterners say, the FAFSA, which is essentially unusual enrollment history, right? So if you're not catching this before they're admitted, they will be flagged for verification and not have financial aid dispersed. So this process is catching that before we can even get to that point. So now it looks something more like this. So we built some additional bins in our reader workflow so that students are going through additional processes, and we've built this right into their review. So now once a student has moved from awaiting submission and has actually submitted their application, this question in the blue box is the logic on the back end of Slate. And it's basically saying, is the student a transfer student? All transfer students go through this process. Or is the student a freshman applicant who is 19 years or older? I'm sure you can guess why the second part is there, because students lie. Sometimes they leave things off intentionally. Sometimes they forget to put something on there. They want to start over. We've heard all of the different situations, but the reality is we need a full enrollment record. So we run all transfer students and any freshman applicant 19 or above. If they meet that criteria, they're going to move into the NSC First Check bin. For us, we have two wonderful counseling associates who do a lot of our front-end work with email and phone calls. They also work this process. And so what they do is they work in Reader. This is sort of what it looks like here. So they've got the student information on the right-hand side, and then these are the options that they can select in the upper left-hand side. So they can either say the student was not found, or unclear results. If they answer either of those two, it's going to flow to another bin, which is called NSC Ops Check Bin. So our operations team will actually go in, because they're some of the only folks in our office that have access to social security numbers, and they'll run one more additional search in the NSC using name and social to see if we can find that record. Otherwise, the bottom two are self-explanatory. Either we found no additional enrollment information, or we did find additional schools. If we did, and that option is selected, the schools found, right here in the same reader form, the counseling associates can add the SEEB, the enrollment dates, all of it right there, so that before we submit the form, all of that has now been added to the student's checklist, and before they even move on to awaiting materials or awaiting decision, we now have a full list of what we need from them to move forward. Only you can prevent bad data. And so I highly recommend that you adopt this process because, again, not only is it good for your reporting, this is super, super important for student success. Next, we're going to talk about tags. So these are some of the specific transfer tags that we have created over the past few years. For those maybe less familiar, tags are essentially ways of organizing records, whether it's students or organizational records in Slate, by populations. So we have various tags that we use to organize the City Colleges of Chicago or certain partner schools. And so for some of our transfer student tags, we have guaranteed admission, self-explanatory. It's for any student meeting the requirements of their guaranteed admission agreement. Transfer articulation, if a student is following an approved transfer guide. Phi Theta Kappa, if the student is a member of PTK. And then Star Scholars is specific to the Chicagoland area. At the City Colleges of Chicago, if a student is a Star Scholar, we have an additional scholarship that they're eligible for at Columbia. And so this is how we list those questions in our reader form. These are all in the same section when we are data entering their school information and considering them for admission. These are some of the additional transfer questions that appear for students who may need this evaluation. So I want to focus first on those top two, which is the PTK and the Star Scholar one, because those are related to scholarship processes. So simply selecting yes for both of those will add the respective tag. And then we utilize that in our scholarship awarding processes. So these are the queries that our Assistant Director of Scholarships utilizes. And as you can see, the core of both of those queries is the tag. We use, of course, we want to focus on fall specific and 2024 specific, but really how we're identifying these students is through utilizing the tag that is set in the first read process. The next question is whether or not the student has earned more than 75 credit hours. And that is going to set a tag that we have that's called high credit transfer. And that's really important for us. As we know, high credit transfers, students who are transferring a significant amount of credit, are more likely to have credits slip through the cracks. So we sometimes will spend more time looking at their OCEs to make sure that nothing was missed. They also need additional advising to understand that, yes, you have 75 credits, but you still have 2.5, 3 years left based off of the prerequisites. So we want to make sure that we are giving those students the attention they need. And then we also have our guaranteed admission questions. So for us, we have various guaranteed admission agreements with lots of community colleges, but the core of those is pretty much the same. These questions will only show up for students whose most recent school that they attended, their school one, is a school that we have a guaranteed admission agreement with. So these are not listed for every transfer applicant. It's just those who may be eligible. And so for us, they need to complete Comp 1 and 2 with a C grade or better, math with a C grade or better, and a 2.5 cumulative GPA. If we answer yes to all three of those, then we would automatically add that tag as well. This is a screenshot just from our specialty scholarship review process. For students who are guaranteed admission and complete their associate's degree, there's an additional scholarship they may be eligible for. And so you can just see circled in both of those areas where those tags are displayed prominently for us to be able to see during that review. Tags are also great for reporting. So this is one of our guaranteed admission reports. This is super useful not only for us to get a sense of how many students are meeting the requirements of our guaranteed admission agreements, but this is great information to share with your community college partners. They want to know how many students are matriculating successfully. And so again, this entire report is based off of that tag. And then we just add additional lines for each SEEB code for each respective school that we have an agreement with. We also utilize the PTK tag for reporting. This is something that I did quite recently, actually. As we all know, budget cuts are a real thing. And so my director came to me and said, we have to cut some of our vendors. And so I thought to myself, well, we've been buying PTK for several years now. Is it actually worth it? Or is it something that could possibly be on the chopping block? And what I actually ended up finding was incredibly surprising, which is that we enroll between 30 and 60 students a year who come directly from the Phi Theta Kappa import. It's their first introduction into Slate, and we enroll 30 to 60 of those students. That's a huge ROI, right? A massive one. And so this was able to help us advocate not only to keep that funding, but to really show that it's working, which felt great, knowing that there's so limited options for transfer inquiry and prospect data out there. For transfer articulation, this is a little bit new. We just added this part this year. We actually added these questions to the application themselves. And I know that can sound risky to some of you in the room. We're letting students tell us what they think. Yes. So we are allowing them to indicate whether or not they plan to earn their associate's degree before transferring to Columbia. And then we're also asking them if they are following one of our approved transfer guides. And we have yes, no, and I'm not sure, because let's be honest, most students do not use our language and may not even know what that means. So we also provide that button is a link that takes them to our main transfer website that has all of our articulation agreements listed there by school. So if they're not sure, they can go check this page really quick, see if theirs is listed, and then come back to answer that question at that time. But that particular tag, the TR articulation tag, is set from this question in the application. That was new this year. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second because it's related to another process, but OCEs are a part of that process as well. So to give you some context, the way that we currently organize things, our degree evaluators from the Office of the Registrar have queries in Slate that are pulling each individual material that is uploaded. So every transcript, test score, all of those are being pulled by a query, and they're grouped by new applicants, enrolled students who might be submitting updated transcripts, and returning student applications who are submitting new transcripts for credit. And so what they're doing is they're data entering in there, and they have a panel of UAchieve, which is the other program that we use, and they're entering that information into UAchieve simultaneously. What they do at that point is they are going to create the final PDF UAchieve official credit evaluation, and they're going to upload it into a SharePoint folder. Admissions has access to that SharePoint folder, and so twice a week, our Assistant Director of Transfer Initiatives goes in there and downloads all of the new official credit evaluations and pulls them into Slate through Batch Acquire. Show of hands, who knows what Batch Acquire is? Okay, for those of you that don't know, your operations team probably uses it a lot more, but basically you can upload any type of document into Slate and then utilize Batch Acquire to assign it to student records. So that is what she's doing. She's pulling all the PDFs in and then assigning them to the student records so that their OCEs live in Slate and can be accessed at all times. And so this is something, if you take anything away from this presentation, let it be this. This is something that we implemented a few years ago, and I think we've had tremendous success with it. So prior to this, we would admit students as soon as they were admissible. Right? And then sometimes they'd be waiting 1, 2, 3 weeks to finally hear back about their official credit evaluation. And during that time, the emails, the texts, the phone calls, the appointments, and we have no information. I have no answers to give you until that OCE is created. So what we decided to do instead was not admit students at all until the OCE is on file. And that has been transformational for us and for our students. And so now the way that it works is if a student is recommended for admission, they're either going to go to the admit bin or the honors admit bin, and then they're going to flow to a new bin that's called transfer checks. And there's a few different things that we do within this bin. And so some information has been redacted for student privacy, but we're able to see school 1. And then we're able to see the first date there is the bin timestamp. That means when they entered this specific bin, the TR check bin, what date that was. In the example there with the arrow, you can see that they don't have a date next to it for eval date. That means that student does not have their OCE in Slate yet, and therefore they're not ready to be reviewed. The students above them do. But if a student is missing their evaluation for more than a week, we have a check query that we run to pull those students, and we reach out to the Office of the Registrar about getting an update on those students. For the most part, they can turn around an OCE in about a week, so if it's taking longer than that, it's either fallen through the cracks, sometimes the PDF doesn't make it into SharePoint, or it could be that courses are requiring additional articulation and taking some more time, so we just want to get an update on those students to get them a timely decision. If they do have their eval already in the Slate, they'll have an eval date there, and that means that that student is ready to be reviewed. These are the questions that we ask in this particular bin. So what we're looking at is their actual official credit evaluation PDF for Tina T transfer. And so we're looking, this first question, evaluation upload complete. We're not asking whether or not an OCE is on file, because clearly it already is. What we are checking for at this stage is to make sure that the student's entire enrollment record is on the OCE. Sometimes students have 4, 5, 6. I just encountered one that had 26 schools. So sometimes they have more than one. And so what we want to do is make sure that on the OCE, all of their schools are present. I want to stress that we are not sitting here going course by course and making sure that the equivalency makes sense, because we simply don't have the time. So what we're looking for just at this stage is a very preliminary quality check to make sure that all schools are listed on the OCE. We also are making sure that whether or not they have English and math credit on this document. And that is because later on down the line, in the summer, closer to the start of term, we start doing math and English placement, as I'm sure many of you do. And prior to our changing of this policy, transfer students were getting those emails as well. And the panic ensued. I already have math and English. Are you telling me that credit doesn't transfer? Do I have to retake it? No, none of it applies to you. You're all good. But so now we answer these questions to remove these students from those communications. If they don't have math or English credit, then they should be getting those emails to let them know about the placement process. But if they do have credit, we remove them from those to avoid any of that additional anxiety. You can also see here that handy dandy TR articulation tag will also show up for students that it's applicable to. So as a reminder, this tag is set when the student self-identifies on the application that they believe they're following an agreement. That's fine and dandy, but we're going to double check to make sure that's true. So now, in this part of the process, we still are doing the same questions there at the top, the math and English, and is everything on the OCE, but we have a few additional questions as well. Is the student meeting the requirements of the appropriate transfer articulation agreement by following the approved transfer guide? And the answer to that is either going to be yes no, or it's in progress. And in progress, usually at this point, we're using as we think so, but we need to see some updated transcripts to make sure that they are following that. So what we do to answer that question is the assistant director of transfer initiatives is physically going through the transcript and comparing it side by side to our approved transfer guide and seeing if the courses that they've been taking and are going to take are meeting or basically aligning with that guide. And that's what we're basing our answer to that question off of. The other thing you'll see there is whether or not the student needs a major change. And that is specifically because we have very strict deadlines for BFA and BMUS programs at Columbia. So that's Bachelor of Fine Arts and Bachelor of Music degrees. Normally, any other student needs to have their portfolio either in by December 1st or January 15th through 18th, depending on the year. And so a lot of times transfer students miss that deadline. But if they're following one of our approved transfer guides, we have several of them that are going from an AAS or an AFA into a BFA or BMUS program. And basically, if they're meeting the requirements of that agreement, we need to honor that they're able to come directly into the major of their interest and not the BA equivalent of that program. And so this is allowing us to change the major ourselves to the BFA if it's after that deadline, because we remove the BFA and BMUS from the application so that no new students are accidentally applying when they're not eligible. And so this is allowing us to change the major ourselves. And similarly, sometimes we'll see students who are following a BFA transfer guide who apply to the BA. Some of them, graphic design in specific, they have to come into the BFA because there's not enough major credit left to complete at Columbia if they come into the BA program. And so that's another example of when we would update the major to a BFA instead of a BA. So again, once they've gone through that transfer check process, now they're ready for their decision to be released. So they're going to flow back either to the admit bin or the honors admit bin and be ready for their decision to be released. Tina T Transfer's wonderful status page here is going to show us that. So you can see the big, beautiful button there for viewing the admission decision. And underneath that, they're able to see that official credit evaluation as well. So as soon as they are notified of admission, they can go to their status page and see both of those documents immediately. There is no wait. There are no questions. Well, at that point anyways. Then we're able to have the little info button. So we just let them know, that they should look at their official credit evaluation, look through it. But honestly, we know it's complicated. And so we recommend that they sign up for an appointment with us. There's a little virtual link right there on the right-hand side of the page. And we take it a step further. This is something that we just started doing recently as well. In the email that we're sending to let them know that their official credit evaluation is there, is we're actually breaking down how to read it. Show of hands, who uses UAchieve? Not as many as I was expecting. It's not a pretty document, as we know. It's very confusing. I've always sort of said that it reminds me of computer code. Students don't know how to read it. It's so confusing for them. And so we actually provide them how to read it themselves if they want to take a look first. And then, of course, we're here to help walk them through it if they want to have an appointment. But we want to provide them those tools because we know transfer students love to be self-reliant. Sending this via email also allows us to track the metrics and as far as how many times it's been opened, how many times that link has been clicked. So this is really helpful data for us to know as well. Summarizing just some of my key findings and impacts as we wrap up on time here. For the National Student Clearinghouse, that really improved for us to have more accurate data and preventing those financial holds. For tags, we have much easier specialty scholarship awarding, and we can do accurate and robust reporting. One of the things that we're going to start working on next, now that we have this data, is are our agreements working, right? We're going to be able to see how many students are actually coming in through specific major agreements. And so that can help inform us of if we should continue to renew certain agreements, if no one's following them, should we be looking at new majors to build agreements with? So the reporting possibilities are endless. Official credit evaluation and transfer check bin, that's quality control. Honoring our transfer guides and agreements, preventing that conflicting information, and getting information to students faster regarding decisions and credits. Looking ahead, just to mention some of the other things that we're working on, I am trying to move the entire official credit evaluation process into a reader workflow. I think the queries are messy, they don't work, they end up letting students fall through the cracks. And so moving it into reader is a huge step. Not a lot of schools have been able to pull that off. So stay tuned if we're able to get that done. Achieve Columbia is our new Deny Pathway program. So we are going to heavily rely on the Achieve Columbia tag for reporting on how that program is performing and how things are going, as well as scholarship awarding. And then we're trying to make review your OCE instead of just that button. We're trying to make it an actual checklist item so that we can track how many times the student is actually clicking the button or if they are. That's a work in progress. If you figured it out already, please let me know. But that is something that we are working on as well. That is all my time. That is all my things. So thank you all so much for being here. That's my contact information. Please take a photo. I'm happy to connect with you. And I haven't been keeping too much of a track on time, but I think we've got some time for questions if you've got them. Yes. Not necessarily the tags per se. Unfortunately, we have the really old version of CX Genzabar, so that is extremely limited. We are currently looking at a new SIS. Hopefully, it'll be able to accommodate some of those things. So not all of that information is able to flow to CX. Yeah, and academic advisors all have access to Slate as well because they do a couple of processes in our system as well. Mhm. Yes. We have the same problem. We ask them both on the application, but then we also, at Columbia, new students do not register themselves. They go through a process known as the registration questionnaire. So they're providing us information about their kind of preferred dates and times, things like that. And there's another question in there about are you or have you already earned AP, IB, CLEP, or dual enrollment credit? And that's our another way of nudging them. So we're gonna, once we get the answer to that question, we send another email com to them that says, you should really send that in. Also, anyone who gets credit of any kind is getting an official credit evaluation. So all of those freshmen who have dual enrollment AP, IB, they're getting an OCE on their portal as well that they're able to view.
So what about students who apply, say, in the fall for the next fall? So they've got another semester's worth of, so how does that show up in the OCE?
So it'll show up as in progress for what we were able to see. And then we tend to recommend students if they can financially afford to send an updated transcript after every semester. That's more beneficial for us. So we're not registering you for stuff you don't need. But we also, in that registration questionnaire, they can tell us what classes they're taking that semester so that we can, again, avoid registering for something that they're already taking. Yeah, that's a great question. I'll repeat the question. The question was that at their specific institution, a student has to accept their admission before they can see the official credit evaluation. That is not our policy. A student does have to fully complete their application to get an official credit evaluation. So similarly, we don't want to be doing awaiting material, students who are never going to finish it. But once they have finished their application and submitted all required official transcripts, they're automatically starting that evaluation process. Yes. Yes. I appreciate that question because I think we all have different definitions of transfer. Yes, for Columbia, it's a student who has attempted credit after high school graduation. So even if they, went somewhere and they ended up failing that semester or whatever, they would still be considered a transfer student. And similarly, a freshman could have an entire dual enrollment associate's degree and is not considered a transfer, which I have my own feelings about. But So if they've completed their application, they likely still will get an evaluation. I mean, on the plus side, if they're a strong deny, they probably didn't pass any of that coursework or much of it anyway. So most of it's just going to say does not transfer for grade. But we do still evaluate anyone who has completed their application fully. Oh yeah, and because of Achieve Columbia, we'll be able to provide them additional opportunities afterwards and sort of say, here's what you can retake. Here are some options for you to attempt to transfer in the future as well. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, yes. That's a great question. The question, just to make sure everyone could hear it, they have a small transfer team, and so a lot of this work that we talked about today is manual versus utilizing the system to help with some of that. When I was making this presentation, I a little bit felt some like imposter syndrome. I was like, some of this seems so obvious. And then I realized like 2 years ago, we weren't doing any of this. So it's not so obvious. And so I would say it's advocacy and it's one, if you can iron out the process digitally, it's there forever, right? And you can of course improve it and tweak it as you need to, but building it out in Slate is the way to make sure that this is not only equitable, but it's long term, right? Because people leave, systems don't. And so if we're able to have this built and ready, anyone can take it over, anyone can do it, versus relying on people to keep manual records. That's just not ideal. It's not beneficial. Yeah.
And I assume a lot of these processes kind of built out over time where you kind of found the gap and you realized, oh, we could do that. So what was like the first change that you did?
The first change that I ever did was that we found a lot of the places that we were importing school data from, so Parchment as an example, they are not always using an accurate SEEB code. And they're sending a weird, wonky 18-digit SEEB. So some of the first processes that we fixed were that because our entire staff assignment is based off of school one. And if the SEEB code is not correct, that even if it says Oakton Community College, if the SEEB's not there, it's not connecting to the correct representative. And so we started to find I was seeing Oakton assigned to me, and I definitely was not the representative for Oakton. So that was the very first thing we found was that we were starting to get bad data, and that was our first thing that we tackled was we actually have a check query now for the SEEBs that we know of that are wrong or problematic, and we fix those before they even get to the application process. Any other questions? Fabulous. Well, thank you all again so much for joining me this morning. And please let me know if you have any questions.